chapter 3. John, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Reflections on farming. You talk about your late 30s and 40s and living totally devoted to two things that you love best, meditation and farming. And then I highlighted, you write about the school taught us to live in the present moment. And then you continue, there I discovered I could not at the same time be lost in my own thought. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of living in the present moment? I think that's a big one.
Yes. It is a big one, and it's absolutely, it's so important. I was lucky to love my work. I really loved the land. I was blessed to work on some of the best land, certainly in England, if not in the world. It was soil that was washed down from the Alps, so I'm told, by the River Rhine and deposited before the North Sea was formed. And it was silt. And I didn't have a single stone on my farm, not one. It was deep, deep silt, and then quite a couple of feet down, you'd come to clay. So it was wonderful soil. It was like velvet. And it was absolutely a farmer's dream. So it was very, very easy to almost reverence my soil. And it grew things bigger than anywhere else. You put a plant in there, and you put a cabbage in it, and it just grew into that size cabbage. A gardener's dream. So, sorry, a bit of a preamble, but working on this soil, first of all, digging it or working it in any way, I love to work by hand. I never liked machinery. And I was brought up in the days when old farm crafts were still existent. They hadn't all been phased out by modern machines. So I knew how to work by hand. And because I loved it, it was easy to give myself totally to it. You know, after I'd been working alone for a number of years, I got married. And I married a girl who was also from farming background, but she lived in London, and she thought a lot. Her mind was full of things, had quite a sort of agitated mind, a typical modern mind. And she was surprised that I didn't think hardly at all. I just didn't think. My mind was almost totally quiet. In fact, I think sometimes the only question that was in my mind after hour of a bent back working in my field was how much longer to lunchtime. In fact, that's said to be the most common question in farming. How much longer to lunchtime or tea time? And it's quite right, believe it or not. My mind was absolutely quiet. In fact, I've never found it difficult to have a quiet mind. I don't think very much. I'm not very interested in thought, really, especially when I'm doing something I enjoy, like, well, in those days, farming or walking or yes, I really don't think. So I recommend anyone that's bothered with an active mind to find something they love and do it with love. It's very easy. You can't I don't know any really effective way of getting the mind by force and trying to somehow get rid of thoughts. All that, it just sort of works up into ever more tension. But when you find something you love, it happens so gently and sweetly and naturally because you're more interested in what you do. I'll give you a very simple example. Just try, if you're lucky enough to have a dog or a cat or something, just stroke it. And you'll find that the pleasure of just stroking an animal, you give attention to what you're doing, your mind will settle down and become quiet. Ever so simple. in a way, love is its own reward. And the more you love, the more you'll want to love. And when you do something with love, you'll do it well. You'll produce something that other people want. I grew the most beautiful vegetables because I loved them and they were so beautifully presented and cared for. People recognized something about it. I became quite successful selling vegetables. Works of love. In fact, I've written a book, I should have it, show it on the screen, called Mystic Apprentice, which is subtitled Working for Love. It was all about my early days on the farm, and it describes articles I wrote in my as a young man when I was starting to farm, how I was trying to put these lessons into practice.
So John, I'm gonna ask you a question. Just maybe have you give a little advice. I know a lot of us, and I hear this often, it's like, I don't really have anything I love to do. Like, this is a common thing. You were gifted the love for farming. I have things I love, but I know a lot of people don't have the opportunity, or maybe they think they don't love something. What advice would you have for us?
Oh my dear, what can I say to that? I think I've always been embarrassed by too much love. The great problem in my life was finding someone to give it to. People used to say I smothered them with my love. I couldn't keep it in. I'm just bubbling over with it. But well, at least towards the things I love, not to everything, of course. And that came much later in life. Yes, I know some people just aren't made that way. Yes, I recognize that. What can they do? Well, I suppose they've got to resort to some sort of intellectual method of controlling their thoughts, of which there are countless methods. I suppose meditation is various forms of meditation, or even things like music, or yes, I suppose music's quite a common one, isn't it? Or drawing, that's a very common thing to do. Art, a lot of people go to art classes, don't they, with this aim in mind. Then there are 1,000,001 sort of simple approaches to meditation. Yoga is one of them. A lot of people find physical exercise is a way to, sport is a way to bring a quiet mind. People walk, don't they? Usually when you go out for a walk, you leave at least some of your thoughts behind. Keep a pet. Yes, they're none of them things that I really did much in my life, but people do use them. And of course, a lot of other people just go into books about it. I mean, there are countless books written giving you an intellectual approach of explaining the various factors of the mind that come into play, and some people find it helpful just to sort of try to do it with knowledge, try to discover something better, or substitute a good thought for a bad thought. I suppose they're all more or less effective to different sorts of people. I think everybody's got to figure it out for themselves, really. I don't think there is a blanket recipe that works for everybody. We're all too different. That's why I'm a bit reluctant to say do this or that. I think it's best just to speak from my own experience, and then some people who will recognize it and say, oh yes. To others, it'll just be nonsense.
On page 27, you write about it isn't easy to be completely truthful, but I think I have the best chance of being truthful if I stick to my own experiences and write of how my own understanding has developed.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it? I remember being told that, being pointed out. This was in the School of Meditation, which I was attending at that time. I had to go down to London to attend it. It was an awful bore for me, but I did. Yes, being told that it's almost impossible for us to speak the truth. Well, first of all, let's get a definition of what we mean by the truth, shall we? Well, there again, I could give you truth has many shades of meaning, doesn't it? What do we mean by it? I remember being given one very good definition of truth being that which doesn't change. Because if it changes, how can it be true? And what in life doesn't change? Well, again, we just touched on this great discovery of the invisible presence, the silent invisible presence, unchangeable presence. But at a lower level of consciousness, what do we mean by truth? Just as I look out of the window now, beyond the computer, there's a lovely tree, a birch tree actually. It's just beginning to lose its summer bloom and become a bit autumnal. Beyond that's the hillside and the clouds, a bit of silvery lining and a little bit of blue sky. Well, see, that's one sort of reality. And the other is thinking that we've just been talking about. Now, if I sit here thinking, I sort of get into this sort of situation. I get shut into a world of my own, a sort of bubble of thought in which I'm not aware of what's outside the window. So we have two sorts of realities. This reality, which is me and my thoughts, and that reality out there of nature being natural. Well, to my mind, this is unreliable because it's changing all the time. Well, that's also changing, but it's sort of not subject to me. Yes, that's what makes the difference between me and that which is not me. That's really the thing. And that you can call, if it's me, it's impure because the me, the ego, is the source of all our trouble. It's really what's called the devil in old-fashioned language. The ego, the I, me, mine. What does it mean to me? What do I think? My opinions. I'm right and you're wrong. And that world that is free of it all, the trees and the sky and the earth, which is not subject to me, you see. Now then, when you speak from real experience, you're much more connected to that world than you are to this one. So you're immediately on safer ground. And if you really speak from real experience as to the unfolding day, you'll find there's no I, me, or mine about it. The basic difference is between something that's ego-based, I, me, mine, and what is describing the feeling of sitting in a chair, just feeling my mouth open and close, wondering what to say next, looking at you. I hear a dog barking in the street. Now that's pure experience. It has nothing to do with you, with me. No traffic at the moment, just that little dog. Oh, I can hear my clock, tick-tock, tick-tock. An old-fashioned clock on the wall. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It's very comforting just to sit here. I often just listen to sit here. Tick-tock, tick-tock. My mind's completely quiet. I'm just watching you now. Your finger is just moving on your chin, isn't it? It often does when we're not sure what to say or do. We do something with our hands, don't we? There's a sort of mechanical process about it. It's not really I, you, or me, is it? It's just movements of the body, like my hands. Look at them, they're moving, aren't they? It's between what is true and not true. But it's a great subject, this. We'll often refer to this. But if you listen to people on the radio, for example, or just people talking, it's nearly always about me, isn't it? I, me, and mine, what I think, or I think the world's terrible, or I like, so I don't like so and so. It's all, so I think it's what you call subjective, isn't it? It's all about me orientated, me centered. Then the other people also talk about me. So nobody's really very interested in anybody because we're all talking about me. But real experience is shared by everybody. Just look at that beautiful sunset. Isn't the frost beautiful on the ground? Oh, it's cold today. That's the difference, really. And by the way, anybody that reads my books, because I was well instructed, given this instruction to speak from my, let me just go back a bit, because I remember something. Yes, a feature of this school of meditation where I went to, you see, we used to meet in groups. And each week the tutor would ask regarding our own meditation practice, what did you experience? Now, if you ask anybody that, they'd usually waffle on about I think, or about their own ego. Very few people will actually describe their own experience. I saw this, or I felt this. Usually it's sort of colored by I think. This is and that's why I write. All my 10 books are written entirely from experience. I don't think you hardly find a single place in my books where I write, I think. I don't write from thought. Now, most writers write their thoughts, or even worse, people who write novels, the whole thing is thought. It's just imagination. It's just coming out of this, you see. Whereas I try to write nothing but experience. In other words, what is revealed when you look out of the window, or revealed when in meditation, it opens up and you see something.
You write about the different levels of consciousness, and I know you've done many videos about that.
Yes.
A sentence that really stood out to me is, one didn't have to change anything, but one had to wake up or become more alive.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what consciousness really means to you and what this becoming more alive means to you in relation to the levels of consciousness?
Well, a very simple start to that subject is what happens when you just climb up a hill. Well, I suppose if you live in a skyscraper, go up in the elevator. What happens? Street level view, and then there's the view as you go up. It changes, doesn't it? It's extraordinary how it changes. We start off with probably something you could call a worm's eye view. And then you gradually grow up to perhaps a rabbit's view, and then a little bird's view, and then a great big eagle's view. And up you go, you see, at each level, the world appears differently, doesn't it? And what at street level can appear absolutely dreadful, rubbish all over the place and threatening sort of people. You go up high and you forget about all that, and you just see the marvelous panorama around you. In fact, you can look down on the traffic from a high point of view and see it as a beautiful unfolding pattern, can't you? Because if you're down there stuck in a traffic jam, the whole thing's driving you crazy. I remember very well, soon after being told that, I had a little van then. I was delivering vegetables in London, And I was driving around Hyde Park Corner, which is one of the great sort of traffic sort of hubs in central London, a place that you're a bit nervous of because it's just an ocean of cars. And suddenly something just twitched in my mind, and I saw it as a beautiful, ordered movement. All the tension went out, and it was like a beautiful sort of symphony almost of movement. Extraordinary. Same place, absolutely nothing changed. Same fumes everywhere. And from one point it was dreadful. God, can we get out of this? And the other I was happy as a sandboy, full of smiles. And the great discovery of meditation, which again I've often referred to, is that you see, in meditation, instead of having to climb a mountain, what you do is just, as it were, right up in consciousness in yourself and discover that high up view within yourself. This is the amazing thing that happens. So it does, when you practice long enough, you'll find it does rather alter the way you see things, you see. Just to go back to scripture for a moment, you see, the story of man is that he started off in paradise, the Garden of Eden. And then you see, he fell. Well, where did he fall to? He fell in consciousness, you see. So in paradise, there was only one. Adam was singular, just one man, you see, because that's the state we call unity, oneness, where he was united with God, and the world wasn't full of other people. It's because we were all one. Just like you can get the view from the top of a skyscraper, can't you? There's this sort of sense of all-embracing oneness. Now, as you fall, it becomes more and more separate. So by the time you get to the bottom, oh God, people everywhere driving you mad. People. Well, same world, isn't it? Just a different point of view. Well, levels of consciousness, a simpler way of describing it perhaps is just point of view. And you change your point of view, my dear, and the world can be a very different place. One of the things that you tend to leave behind is criticism. Now, that's a real pig in the middle, isn't it? If you look out at life critical, as most of us do for most of the time, then of course you immediately divide the world into in between what you like and what I don't like. Which you see is a slippery slope down to separation, what's called duality. So on a seesaw, we go up and down between duality and occasional glimpses, perhaps, of something a bit more unified. And with a bit of luck, with practice, we may become more unified and less separated. But that takes time.
I must be very low consciousness, John, because I love being not around people.
I think a lot
I hate to admit it.
But that's only an echo of myself. And but funnily enough, now in old age, I'm not quite so negative as I was about it. I think a very, very good practice that I've often done is just, particularly when I started writing books, I used to have a little stall, and I'd sit out in the streets, especially on market day when the streets were full, and just sit there. Of course, most people aren't interested in my books, they just walk past, but just sitting there, being still myself, it's extraordinary how the whole world is sort of rather like that, driving around in the traffic. All these people walking past can be seen as a perfectly ordered movement. And I'm sitting there in complete peace, completely undisturbed, just loving everything. Extraordinary. Who would have thought it? There's hope for you, dear, for everybody. And it's a jolly good thing, I think, to start off with. being fed up with the world, because you see, there's a motive to find something better. There's a motive to find a way of dealing with it. And of course, there is a way.
I appreciate your encouragement. One thing you just mentioned, which I think is really important for me to hear, and probably for a lot of us, is you said practice long enough.
Yes.
Because I think we meditate and then 6 months later, we don't feel any more enlightened. 60 years for you.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm afraid, yes, it's difficult. I know in this day and age, not many people have that sense of application, do they? There was another thing actually that occurred to me. I forgot to mention it yesterday. I suppose when people lived in smaller houses and had larger families, tidiness was such a part of life. It was so much part of my upbringing. And then when I went to boarding school, we had to make our own beds, and we had to fold our clothes. We had to fold our blankets. And then even more so in the army, there was this insistence on order. You know, we had to always be very careful about how we were dressed, and the uniform had to be correct, had to be clean, cleaning our boots, our equipment. So orderliness is deeply ingrained in me. And then not so long ago, this culture of untidiness somehow broke into our lives. I don't know where it came from. You know, it was unthinkable for men to go around with their shirts hanging out of their trousers when I was young. And now people do it as fashion, don't they? It's quite extraordinary. And people walk around with torn jeans with their knees sticking out, and all sorts of funny things which have become fashionable, but which were unthinkable years ago. Well, I suppose it's fun. I don't suppose it matters if you wear your shirt in or out of your trousers, but you see, one of the features, one of the side effects of this is that the mind becomes sloppy. The mind loses its sense of discipline. The other day we had some guests here, and there were 3 teenage girls they brought with them. And I was invited to their house. They hired a house. And I went upstairs and just looked through the door into the girls' bedroom. And of course, the whole place was in chaos, clothes all over the place, and the bed was unmade. And yeah, good God, I can hardly believe it. But I was talking about this afterwards. And, well, that's just what teenagers do these days. Well, my dears, in all seriousness, if that's how you live your daily life, how can you expect to apply yourself to a practice, a disciplined practice, or, for example, dealing with the chaotic mind? If you can't even sort out the clothes in your bedroom, how are you likely to sort out your mind? You know, I say this in all seriousness. You know, there's an old saying, cleanliness is next to godliness. Cleanliness is next to godliness. And I suggest tidiness is pretty near the same thing, and leading an orderly, disciplined life. Good habits, good manners. We can't run before we walk, and if you're not taught this discipline, I believe there's a German saying, isn't there? Orden über allen, something like that. Order above all. Very interesting, isn't it? Very good. Good saying.
Ordnung über alles.
Yes, something like that, yes.
Well, I appreciate this this piece of wisdom, John. And when I hear you talk about cleanliness and tidiness, so much of it comes down to just choice.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. On page 28 in chapter 3, you write about whatever encouraged life was good,
Yes.
whatever didn't was to be avoided.
Yes,
Could
absolutely.
you elaborate?
Yeah, let me once again bring you back to, I'm writing now at a time when the organic movement was in its infancy. And I was one of the first people to actually practice this as a farmer and grow vegetables in this way. And compost, of course, was one of the great subjects, and people were talking, well, what is compost? And this became what's it all about? What is this nebulous something called life force, which we were all trying to, in some way, get in contact with? Well, as meditation gradually opened up to me this world that's beyond the thinking mind, and I began to get my first sort of glimpses of what I now call spirit, and realize that spirit is sort of the unseen, unheard energy that enlivens and inspires us. It's really the life force. If you ever watch anybody die, you see the body dies, and this is what rises up. In fact, we're a mixture of spirit and matter, spirit and flesh, but our thinking, our whole sort of living tends to be dominated by what's called the flesh, the body and the mind, and we tend to forget about spirit. Well, this is really the missing dimension in life, and when we forget spirit, then life becomes small, too small, and then we get frustrated and locked into this duality, you and me. Open up to spirit, and it's all held in balance. So here was I, a young farmer out in my field, thinking, well, what is compost? What is it that makes life tick? What is it that makes my soil fertile? In fact, what is fertility? And then one day it just occurred to me, well, of course, it's this spirit, isn't it? That's what it's all about. Spirit is what makes me alive in a better sense. You look into somebody's eyes and you can see the eyes a light, isn't it? The eye is what brings life to this matter. This is the sort of dead matter, isn't it? But the face is what. Well, anyway, it's obvious, isn't it? Really, without having to get into philosophy. Well, exactly the same thing happens with the soil, you see. Now, when you know a bit about soils, you realize that some soils are more alive than others, and some are more fertile than others. I started farming here in Derbyshire, where nothing much grows but grass. And if you try to grow a carrot, you get something the size of your finger comes out of the ground. When I went to my second farm on this beautiful silt soil, carrots came out the size of my arm. You wouldn't believe it if you didn't experience it. Now I'm talking about real experience, you see. This is not me thinking about it. It's actually, I've known what it is to farm on good soil and on fertile soil. And it's all the difference in the world. Experience. Now then, and to make good soil even more fertile, see, what do you do? Of course, it's spirit. It's all spirit. And how is spirit manifested? Well, you've only got to look at people, aren't you? Some people are more alive than others. Some people are just half dead, aren't they? And others, you just look at them and they're alive. Some dogs are more alive than others. Everything in life, there are levels of life. You see, some things are more alive than others. You know, a stone doesn't have much life, but a tree, for example, has more life than a stone, doesn't it? So you can see nature in terms of levels of consciousness like this. You know, from a stone, for example, to soil, and then grass, and then higher trees, and then the animals, and then different sorts of animals, from worms to the whole, you know. Anyway, soil has little creatures in it. You know, worms, and if you look at even any sort of soil, you'll find ants and little beetles and things in it. And clever scientists tell us there are more bugs or microbes in a, I don't know, a little bit of soil than there are people in the whole world. An uncountable amount of life. Now then, what does life need? It needs air, doesn't it? Therefore, anything that compacts the soil is going to compact the life of the soil and lower the life in the soil, isn't it? And if you drive over the soil with heavy tractors, or even worse, when people park their cars on soil without thinking about it, it's like dropping a weight on a city, isn't it? If you drop a great big weight from the top of a skyscraper onto a city, you crush it. You break all the little passages, the roads, and never mind the people. Now, that's exactly what you're doing when you put your foot, and even worse, a great heavy machine, on a bit of living soil. You just crush it. And see, fertile soil is full of little, it's just like a great city. It's full of little chambers and passages and different sort of, conglomerations of what's called the crumb structure. And actually, fertile soil has more air in it than actual soil. Interesting point. More space in it. It's not solid. And in these little passages live countless little creatures. And fertile soil almost literally walks off your hand. It's so alive. And infertile soil will just sort of sit there, a soggy lump of nothing much. Now, when you have fertile soil, first thing is that the plant roots is easily spread in it, can't they? And that life force is then transmitted to the plant, so the plant is invigorated, is full of life. And if you eat that food, it has a higher life. It'll nourish the consumer. In the same way with spirit, it's really like more spiritual food. So that's what I mean by giving life to the soil. Anything you do that diminishes the life in the soil, in other words, crush it, or not, and these little bugs must have stuff to eat. So they must have organic matter, which is their food. They live on decaying matter. See, half the creatures in this world live on decaying matter. You see, some creatures feed from death to life, and others live from life to death. They live on decaying matter. And this must be recognized, and you must feed these little creatures, and then they'll multiply. Sorry, I could go on forever on this subject. You see how I love it? Yeah, I love it. You see, I don't think of anything else. I'm out there in my field, absolutely in love with my soil, thinking of this all the time. How can I best serve all the little bugs in my soil?
As I'm listening to you talk and read this sentence over and over, whatever encouraged life was good, whatever didn't was to be avoided. Very much, I hear your message on the soil, and we tend to cover it up with concrete, but I also hear it about ourselves. It's like, as our soul, as you're talking about life, and I think about our soul state and what encourages life in ourselves and what encourages
yes, dear, absolutely,
death in ourselves. On page 31, it kind of ties into that. You write, unless I let God, and I think of term, God, life, whatever, flow into me, God cannot flow out again, and my works will not be the works of God, but the works of me, and correspondingly worthless. To me, that really connects.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, it does. I'm surprised I wrote that. Gosh, how many years ago? Can't remember. Long time ago. I don't think I was 40 when I wrote that. Surprising, isn't it? Gosh.
So how would you connect that to your explanation about what encourages life and what encourages non-life? So unless let God flow into me.
Well, see, this brought, it was I can hardly tell you how exciting this was for me. You know, I was living alone at this time, and I just had this little cottage out on the Lincolnshire Fens. If people don't know what a fen is, it is, in fact, this part of England is called Holland. It was reclaimed from the sea. It was all originally marshland. So it's absolutely flat as a pancake from horizon to horizon. And I had this little cottage way out by itself, out on the fen. So I spent my whole days alone. I hardly saw anybody, just the occasional tractor on the road or in the next field. Didn't speak. But my mind was working on this great discovery of what fertility is, what it is to work with the heart, work with love. And of course, I realized that meditation, when I let go, you see, in meditation, you let go whatever there is, whatever you can let go, really. And like a balloon, you rise up into spirit. And then that somehow permeates your whole life, and that goes into your work. And that spirit, in terms of the soil, is the wiggly creatures in the soil. And so it's all related, you see, as your own spiritual understanding is then transmitted to the earth and to how you work. Because if you work with attention in the same way, so your daily work is a meditation, you never stop meditating. Instead of using a mantra in your head, you're just using whatever you're doing with your hands, you see. So that same quality of stillness, of presence, is transmitted into your work. Like I told you that somebody knitted me a nice, lovely thing the other day, and that love, as he went into that garment. So that love goes into my soil, it goes into the manure, it goes into the work I was doing, what I grew, and so the whole thing is raised to a higher level of consciousness. So really the most important manure, there's an old saying, the farmer's boot is the best manure. In those days, before people had cars, when they walked their fields and farmers wore heavy boots, the farmer's boot is the best manure, because the farmer's boot is the presence of the man who loves his soil. And that love is then goes out into the way he thinks about his soil, what he does with it. It's all motivated and practiced in love. It becomes a work of love. And then life takes on meaning, real meaning. The purpose of life is to love, my dears, in all its myriad forms.
So maybe, John, to wrap up this session, you could give a little bit of a practical advice around this letting go. I love, obviously, the connection to farming and soil, but for those of us that are not farmers,
Yes.
we have guilt or fear or anger, and in
Yes,
that moment, could you
yes.
talk on that?
Well, we do. You don't think I didn't. Yes, I had my problems. My problems has been depression throughout my life. Loneliness and depression have dogged my whole life, really. Yeah, because particularly in the early days, because I thought like this, I felt so isolated from the world I lived in. I didn't know anybody with whom to share these discoveries that were so exciting to me. Now look at me, I'm a lucky boy. I've got an audience, people to come and make videos of me, and I'm allowed to talk my heart out. And surprise, some people actually watch these videos. I can hardly believe it, really. For most of my life, I've just been laughed at or ignored in one way or another. But yes, dear, all these, oh dear, the world's full of poor people suffering fear and God knows what. I was never a very fearful man, but I certainly know an awful lot about depression. What can you do? God knows, I don't know. Just muddle on, my dears. I don't think anybody knows how to deal with depression. I certainly don't. Just muddle on, dear. Things happen in life. Try to put first things first. Yes, that was one of the things that I was taught at the School of Meditation, was to put it first. And I try to, anybody that asks me, I try to say the same thing, but not many people will do. It's you need to want it. You need to have some determination. In fact, I remember once, I'm again being told that the difference between a saint and someone that's not a saint is determination. Someone that gets the bit between his teeth and just keeps plodding on, day by day, my dears. And one day's bad, the next day is awful, the next day is terrible, and then you get a day when maybe things aren't so bad. Then you go back into the glooms again. Struggle on, my dears, struggle on. Keep going. I've got no easy answers. Sorry. If you've got a method of meditation, stick to it. If you've got faith of any sort, if you've got a religion, stick to it. Read good books if you can. Not too much telly. Try to go out for a walk. Try to be with nature. Don't expect too much of people. Don't trust people. That's good advice. That's from the Bible, straight from the good book. Put not your trust in any child of man. Trust nature. I do. I regard my daily walk out in the fields as good for me as meditation. I love the stars at night. If you're lucky enough to be able to see them. Maybe like me, you can get an old-fashioned clock that goes tick-tock on the wall. It's a great comfort. I like old things. Most of the furniture in my flat are old wooden furniture. Much of it from my parents or grandparents. I like it. It gives a sort of continuity. You know, our dear Queen that's just died, she was a lesson of continuity, wasn't she? She just stuck to it day after day. Duty. Duty is a wonderful thing, isn't it? It keeps you going through thick and thin. You know, good thing about farming, you can't sort of not do it because it has its own compulsion. Especially if you've got animals, they've got to be fed whether you want to do it or not. I'd be driven mad in the mornings because the hens were clucking, the pigs were squealing, the sheep were bleating. Come on, blimey. I wouldn't shut up until I'd fed them. I could go and get my own breakfast. The morning I didn't want to. Oh dear. Struggle on, my dears.